white cricketers, they either protested against such discrimination, or there have been instances where they helped, although it was a very small symbolic gesture, but
mm,
it actually rang very well with the
mm,
cricketing community who were
mm,
against the policy of South Africa's apartheid.
mm,
They carried some cups to collect money for the fund
mm.
from the spectators.
And that's how De Oliveira basically went to
Yeah,
England. And, racial prejudices work both ways, and there are people who support racial unity, stand up for their brothers of different color. And sometimes, obviously, these prejudices run deep. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Crick Hub. Today is the 3rd of April, and it's a momentous day in the history of political protests on the field of cricket. But not many know of this history. We all know about apartheid and the big impact it had on South African cricket, the controversies, the comeback, the careers that were ruined of legendary players. But today marks a very important day in protesting against this policy by the cricketers themselves. And we have with us Collar O'Brien, cricket analyst, who's going to discuss this in further detail with us. Welcome to the show, Collar O'Brien.
thank you. And my greetings to the viewers. The 3rd April.
So,
Yeah, please.
yeah.
Yeah, please,
So
Shobjo.
3rd of April, yes, I mentioned the date, but you picked on a topic that many of us don't know about, because sometimes what happens is when we think about the apartheid period in the history of South African politics and obviously sports, we think of it as a monolithic figure in the sense that everyone who was white probably supported this movement, but there were fissures in this as well. We'll come to the Basil de Oliveira affair later, but what happened on the 3rd of April? Can you tell us that?
See, this example, in fact, the apartheid was not really a quote unquote black and white matter. There were some instances, there have been instances where the white cricketers, let's talk about cricketers in this context, white cricketers, they either protested against such discrimination, or there have been instances where they helped colored cricketers to move forward with their career. There are instances. Uh, the one we are going to talk today, the anniversary, if I may say so, 3rd April 1971.
1971.
And that was when the South African Republic, Republic of South Africa, was going to celebrate its 10th anniversary. 1961, South Africa came out of Commonwealth, and then RSA, Republic of South Africa, was formed. And to celebrate that 10th anniversary, the South African government, they organized a match, a high-profile match. And one side there was Transvaal, and the other side it was rest of South Africa. And this match had an additional significance because at that point, of two significances, so to say. Number one, that time there was a talk going on about the South African cricket team going to an Australia tour in 1971-72, which did not happen
Okay.
eventually. And the other
Mhm.
one was during that period, after the Basil de Oliveira affair and 1970, when the England tour to South Africa was cancelled because of the government opposing, I mean, South African government opposing the inclusion of Basil de Oliveira in the English team. That was
Right.
1970. And in between this period, the cricket was in a flux. And that is when this match was scheduled. And uh, the there were some of the best cricketers of South Africa. They were supposed to take part. If I name some of them, you will be able to
Please do.
understand. Barry
Yeah.
Richards, the Pollock brothers, Peter and Graham, Then there was Clive Rice. Then there were other people like Dennis Lindsay, who was a great wicketkeeper batter. So they all were supposed to take part. Vincent Vanderbilt, who made name later on in county cricket. So all
mm,
of them were supposed to play in matches either side, on this
mm,
side or on that side. So
mm.
what happened was, just after the match started, the opening over was bowled by Vanderbilt. The first ball,
Okay.
Barry Richards, he played and took a single. And then suddenly, everybody in the stadium, I mean in the gallery, and of course on the press box, they were stunned to see the two batters and the entire fielding side. They walked away from the field.
Okay.
People were stunned. Nobody were quite sure of it. What happened?
This
Now
was
what
after the
happened?
first ball.
Just after the first ball of the match,
Right.
Richards took a
Okay.
single, Barry Richards, and then players pushed away completely. And then another, after a few minutes, they came
Yeah.
back, and then the match was resumed. So what was the story? What happened was like this. This was a concerted, planned move by the players from both the sides, and all these players were, mind you, white. One issue was there for this tour, 1971-72 proposed tour of Australia. The South African Cricket Union, who control the cricket, the game over there, they decided to include two colored cricketers whose name nobody knew. I mean, nobody knows now. One's name was Suleiman Abid. He was a pacer all-rounder. And the other person's name was Wayne Williams. He was a left-arm spinner. But the South African government, the Vorster government of those days, they put their foot down saying, no, you cannot include colored players in any South African national cricket team, especially in a tour to a foreign country. And there was a friction between these two. And this match was happening along that point of time. So the South African government's dictum came just a few days before the match. And then the players decided that, okay, we will launch a protest. Some of them even decided to walk away from the match for the entire match. They said, no, we will not play the match at all. Then there was one very respected cricket commentator during those days in South Africa. I'm forgetting the gentleman's name. He was regularly in touch with cricketers. So he requested the cricketers, look, there will be so many players, so many spectators. They are going to come and watch this high profile match. It was like an Irani Trophy match. You know, Irani Trophy match, it happens in India.
Yeah. Rest of
One
India versus the
champions
domestic
and the rest
champions.
of the
Yeah.
country. So, and there are so many star cricketers. So he said, that commentator gentleman said that please don't deprive them from the pleasure of watching the match. They are paid. So you make a protest in a token manner, and finally, after some debates and discussions, the players agreed that okay, this will be our token protest to lodge our, I would say, protest against the government policy to overrule the South African Cricket Union for inclusion of couple of colored cricketers in a touring team. So that was the story behind the entire thing of this match,
Mm,
and the world was shocked.
mm.
If you if you go back to some newspaper cuttings of those days,
Yeah.
the media outside South Africa, they gave a huge coverage to this because although it was a very small symbolic gesture, but
Mm,
it actually rang very well with the
mm,
cricketing community who were
mm,
against the policy of South Africa's apartheid
mm.
in the world of
Right.
cricket.
Right.
So that was one thing which happened, and as expected, the then sports minister of the South African government,
Mm,
he just said as okay, it merely is a gesture, nothing else,
mm.
as
Right.
expected.
Mm.
So, and the
So.
cricketers, they also issued a statement, joint statement. I mean, the the participating cricketers, they said that
mm,
okay, we think it was time that we lodged our protest in some way or other, and that's what
mm,
we did.
right.
So that's I think
Follow up the
the story.
yeah.
Yeah,
That's the story in a nutshell. That when legendary cricketers they actually protested on the field and then issued a joint statement against the policies of the government, which is
right.
important. But can you take us back to the Basil de Oliveira affair in short, because that was in a nutshell what kind of brought the world's attention to this policy that the South African government actually imposed on sports as well, and the prime minister himself was directly involved in the shenanigans. And once Basil was picked, I think South Africa refused to play England MCC. Even he was picked after a lot of permutations and combinations. He was a second choice. I mean, he was included in the team after an injury. So, can you, in a brief way, tell us what happened in that affair?
See, it went on steps from 68 in 68-69 season.
Mm,
England was supposed to tour South Africa, and in that tour, initially De Oliveira was not included. Then he performed very well against the Australians in 1968 Ashes series at home, and then still he was not considered. Then one of the selected players, Tom Cartwright, he got injured, and De Oliveira was brought in as a replacement for touring South Africa. And this was a trigger for the Vorster government, which they said no, it is intentional. They have deliberately included one colored player into tour South Africa. So, and that actually created a huge furor in England.
mm,
And then 69 in the next year, 70, I mean, yeah, 70, and that tour was cancelled because the Vorster government said no, we are not
mm,
going to allow any colored cricketer to come and set
mm,
foot
mm,
in South Africa as part of a
mm.
touring site. Done.
Right. Okay.
Now, in 1970, South Africa was supposed to have a reciprocal tour to England.
Mm,
And by
mm,
that time, it been 1 year or so, a huge movement started in South Africa,
mm,
in England,
mm,
led by a gentleman called Peter Hine. Those
mm,
who have gone through this history of anti-apartheid movement, he became very famous subsequently, Peter Hine. So that movement, and finally the tour of South Africa to England in 1970 had to be cancelled. And instead, a rest of the world team toured England to play a few 5-day matches. And during even that time, the team was led by Gary Sobers, rest of the world. And
mm,
even at that time, the South African government, they said to people like Barry Richards, Olaf Brothers, Mike Proctor, no, you don't go and play in that team. But
mm,
still they did.
mm,
There are records for that. And that was in 1970. So that has been going on. And let me mention what that's actually was known as the D'Oliveira affair. That's how it started.
very good. Yes,
But for
absolutely.
those viewers who probably don't know, this basically is the opposition and support of white players to colored players in South Africa. There is an
Mm,
instance which many people don't know. 1960, when De Oliveira was supposed to go to England for playing Lancashire League as a professional, his contract did not include his airfare from Cape Town to London. So and he was not at all a wealthy man. So he was running short of money. So he started, and then some of the players in his locality and his neighbors, they organized some exhibition matches, some singing contests, some lotteries to pull in the money, to pull in fund. And people will be surprised to know amongst those matches, one match was played by a team led by D'Oliveira, which consisted of colored players, and the other team was led by Peter van der Merwe, who later on, mid 60s, became South African captain, and that team contained all white players. They
mm,
played a match, exhibition match. It was a risky thing because it was going against government policies at that point of time. And in that match, players from both sides, Jay carried some cups to collect money for the fund
mm.
from the spectators.
And that's how De Oliveira basically went to
Yeah,
England
and
and then he became,
that money helped Oliveira to fly from Cape Town to London,
yeah,
and the rest is history.
and he became a test cricketer, and then the entire affair that shook the
So
world.
the Oliveira
Uh,
that
you
we
know,
know of 1968,
yeah.
he had some support from some white cricketers in South Africa in
Mm.
1960 in this
Yeah.
form.
Right. Very interesting how things link up. But Walrada, we are coming to the end of our discussion. We don't have a lot of time. But in 1991, of course, South Africa returned to the mainstream in cricket. And since then, we have seen a galaxy of black cricketers representing South Africa.
True.
I mean, whites and blacks, they play together for the team. And you brought up an example from the 70s and the 60s, of course, where white cricketers, established cricketers, helped the blacks, or stood for them. But what is the situation right now? There are still fissures there. Is it still very homogeneous, the reaction? Can you summarize what's going on in South African cricket in terms of racial tensions or racial unity?
It is still there, probably an undercurrent, which sometimes comes to the surface because of various incidents. I will just mention two, three things. One is the recent one when Lungi Ngidi, current player, he raised some accusation against some subtle bar or subtle, I would say, the way of putting the colored players down. And his statement was signed by about 30 odd South African colored cricketers, including players like Hashim Amla, Ashwell Prince, Herschel Gibbs, Varden Philander. All are very well known colored cricketers from South Africa. Okay, that is one instance. Another one happened during, I think, the Black Lives Matter movement, when Quinton de Kock, he refused to kneel down to 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 indicate that BLM movement, to support that BLM movement as a gesture. That's what happened. Even before that, Pat Simcox, long time ago, Pat Simcox, he made some statements occasionally that okay, he tried to downgrade some colored players. Then there are examples where Jacques Callis, Mark Boucher, Graham Smith, A.B. de Villiers, and players of that such, even Pav du Plessis. From time to time, there have been some complaints, formal or informal, coming from colored cricketers saying they are trying to belittle some of these colored cricketers.
Mm.
And the tension is still going on, I believe, because now the government has taken a stance that for quite a few years that there
Yeah.
have to be some colored cricketers included in the team. And that's how
Mm.
the term quota cricketer has come in South African cricket. The
Mm.
best example of that, unfortunate, is Temba Babuma. He is known as the quota captain. He was known as the quota captain, but that's
Mm.
a different matter. But so you can make out that these things are still happening even after
Mm.
30 years of South Africa,
Right.
30 plus years
Mm.
coming back to the cricket.
Right. Of course, Bavuma has proven himself on the field and as a captain, but he has been under immense pressure, and there have been spells of bad form and immense criticism that he has faced.
True,
But it was a very interesting discussion in the sense that racial prejudices work both ways, and there are people who support racial unity, stand up for their brothers of different color. And sometimes, obviously, these prejudices run deep and they still linger on. And then you have to bring in affirmative action to include people of a certain color because they have been, discriminated against for years. And then that causes a disruption in balance. This is true for life as well sometimes. But
absolutely.
it was very interesting that you brought up an example from the 1970s when we thought that apartheid was obviously it was the only dominant principle of the South African state, but very prominent cricketers stood up for equality of players of color, of people who were black, indigenous, and that created a furor which the government kind of shoved under the rug. So thank you so much, Kolarobda, for
Just let
enlightening.
me
Yeah,
before we finish, let me
yeah.
include
Your
one more
final comment here,
small
please.
example
Yeah.
of support of the white cricketer for the their colored counterparts. Mike Proctor, we are all about him. Many people these days they know only about a match referee, but he was a great all rounder during his playing days. So
Mm.
Mike Proctor once said when he was asked that you are such a talented, brilliant cricketer, but you have only a seven-match test career, seven test career tests. He said in one of the in his autobiography, one part I read it. He said that okay, if you consider that about 40 million people they had to undergo the operation of color of this apartheid over years. What is that? I mean, my seven test career, that's very insignificant. My loss of test career is very insignificant against that huge discrimination that has been going around. And so that's how he said that. So it was a very nice way to
Mm.
provide support to his fellow cricketers. So that is was example. Another one where the support coming from a fellow cricketer, irrespective of whether he is a white or black or brown.
Right. Very profound words from Mike Proctor, and we'd like to thank Collar O'Brien for bringing to light a very interesting chapter from South Africa's cricket history. And the undercurrents of that period are still felt, even though South Africa is a strong modern cricketing nation. They were a very strong team then as well. But these things live on in many ways. And one of these examples was brought forward today through Collar O'Brien's intervention today, this discussion. Thank you so much, Collar.